right, I'm going to continue with this reading the special access programs, a look at secrecy levels in the Pentagon's missing trillions by Joel von der Resden. First published September 10th, 2005. Last updated January 30th, 2018. You can find this article on the website for the Institute for the Study of Globalization and Covert Politics. Okay, I'm going to continue where I left off. You'll learn a lot from this article about what's going on with the DOGE currently. Okay, you'll learn a lot, so just listen closely. All right, here we go. Then there's the F-35, the so-called successor to the F-22. The initial estimated development and production costs of the F-35 in 2001, $233 billion for an estimated 2,500 planes. Cost by 2015, $379 billion, a 62% increase. Instead of having the first F-35 combat ready by 2010, that became 2016. Instead of having 1,013 F-35s combat ready by 2016, Lockheed only managed to deliver 179. Then there have been, once again, the countless technical issues, some of which won't be solved until the 2020s. Others may never be solved, as the idea that the F-35 can replace the A-10 as a close air support for infantry plane is just a fantasy. It's too expensive, too fast, doesn't have nearly enough rounds for that, with the gun not firing until 2019 anyway, appears to be missing all kinds of crucial up-to-date systems for CAS missions, which also appear to be too expensive to upgrade. Oh, and ejecting from the aircraft at this point will probably kill or paralyze you. Pilots under 136 pounds aren't allowed to fly any F-35 variant. Pilots under 165 pounds have a 1 in 4 chance of death and a 100% chance of serious neck injury upon ejecting, according to the testing office. I actually happen to be sucker for ambitious projects and consider the creation of the USS Gerald Ford class carriers and stealth airplanes as the B-2, B-21, B-3, F-22, and F-35 to be the equivalent of producing some of the most beautiful art around. However, the F-35 in particular appears to be high-tech and therefore expensive and delayed. For America's good and too much a one-size-fits-all with too many corporate and political interests attached to it. Also, you've got to pay attention to your wallet, part of which involves making sure you're not being ripped off. Either American citizens need to start paying more taxes or they have to start spending less on the military. There's a reason the country has a debt exceeding $20 trillion. It must be said not all of these cost overruns appear to be due to the same reason. The most problematic version of all would be blatant corruption by scrapping cheap programs that work and replace them with giant boondoggles just for corporate profit. That's treason and parasitism and should result in lengthy prison sentences. A less severe version would be the scenario painted by Admiral Hyman Rickover in the mid-1970s. Namely, that defense corporations have a tendency to initially underprice programs and then compensate later on by disproportionately raising the price. It really depends on how large the profit margins are and to what extent nepotism takes place between bureaucrats and defense corporation executives to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. We also have to take general lobbying and blackmail into account here, both nationally and internationally. I personally remember how the F-35 program already was extremely controversial in early 2002, 1 year after receiving the go-ahead from the American government at the time of the Dutch elections. Candidate Pim Fortuyn who would have won the elections if he hadn't been assassinated a week before by a liberal CIA-backed environmental activist, for the longest time campaigned against Dutch participation in the program. Bizarrely, a certain Matt Herbin managed to weasel his way into Fortin's party amidst accusations of blackmail against Fortin, and became the dominant player after Fortin was killed. Herbin, used to work for the Dutch Ministry of Defense, was a rabid Air Force enthusiast, knew the chiefs of the Air Force very well, and had been pushing his party members relentlessly in favor of the F-35 program. On top of that, he refused any contact with representatives of the Eurofighter or Dassault Rafale, two extremely capable jet fighters, much better than the classic F-15s, F-16s, and F-18s, no matter how hard they tried. Needless to say, there were widespread suspicions that Herbin was a plant of the security services sent into Fortin's party to ensure it voted in favor of the F-35. After Fortin's death, the entire party indeed voted in favor of the F-35, just before predictably disintegrating amidst infighting. All of this is extremely reminiscent of the Lockheed bribery scandal of the late 1970s that cost Prince Bernhard his Bilderberg chairmanship and reached as far as Japan, where Lockheed managed to hire CIA asset, Black Dragon Society terrorist, and Yakuza leader Yoshi Kadama as its chief lobbyist. The scandal, along with the parallel accusations against other defense corporations, Northrop and Grumman, also knew a number of curious deaths and assassination attempts, including one on Kadama. All this begs the question, how much has changed? Apparently nothing, except that Lockheed now has international governments working on its behalf, doesn't need to bribe anyone anymore, and can basically get away with anything. So even if, let's say, defense corporations are underpricing projects to bring in contracts, it appears political leaders are fully aware of this, are cooperating in these schemes, and putting pressure on foreign governments on behalf of these defense contractors. While performance and price play crucial roles in international arms sales, it has been said more than once that politics are the third major pillar. Maybe no project signifies that better than the F-35, about which skepticism and overright false statements about its capabilities have existed since the very beginning. Discussing the exact ins and outs of defense corporation corruption and influence on governments is not really the purpose of this article. It's more about bringing key issues to general awareness, but it is a no-brainer that these cost overruns and extreme lobbying practices need to be investigated and curbed. If Lockheed would have been able to deliver the F-22 and F-35 according to its initial promises, or at least close to it, the United States would today, anno 2017, have a fleet of about 500 F-22s and 1,300 F-35s of all classes instead of 190 and 190 or so, while paying $200 billion more for it. It is crucial that steps need to be taken to prevent these kinds of issues in the future. At $600 billion annually, the United States has the biggest defense budget on the planet, but we have to know how much of this is wasted by inefficiency, incompetence, and corruption, especially because the United States has a national debt that exceeds an incredible $20 trillion. If you could save 50 or even 100 billion every year from the defense budget by managing it very efficiently and bring down the national debt in the long run, that might well be the difference between economic prosperity or the economic destruction of the United States. Also, what if China, with its vastly larger population, matches the defense budget of the United States one day? And what if it can do so while preventing inefficiency, incompetence, and corruption? Then maybe even a $500 billion budget would effectively be larger than the $600 billion today of the United States? Who really knows? Clearly, the Pentagon being able to fully account for its spending is a major step in the right direction. For the rest, one would think the media is able to keep an eye on the influence of defense corporations. Although it appears the war on terror, how exactly we got involved in it, 9/11, and what its ultimate real purpose is, has always been beyond reproach. Nobody really asks the important questions, and it appears the same is happening with regard to the so-called military-industrial complex that is thriving because of it. As expected, a full 10 years after the Pentagon accounting issues came to light, new research revealed the problems remain the same and may even have worsened due to the so-called implemented improvements of the Bush administration. Despite that, it seems change was slowly being implemented during the Obama administration, with pressure from Congress and various defense secretaries mounting. Senator John McCain, a notorious war hawk and absolute top superclass member, has repeatedly stated he wants to clean up budget overruns. So has Donald Trump, who in rather clear language stated that Defense Department bureaucrats should never be allowed to go to work for these companies. You know they make a deal like that, and 2 or 3 years later you see them working for these companies that made the deal. They should have a lifetime restriction. Who knows? Maybe things will change to a degree eventually, because let's face it, what McCain and Trump are saying has been said since at least the 1970s. We just demonstrated that. Lockheed, so corrupt, is pushing UFO disinformation. How could I forget in the past there has been speculation about the non-existent deathbed confession of Lockheed Skunk Works founder Ben Rich about star travel technologies locked up in black projects. The thing is, Rich never made that statement. It was simply invented, seemingly by coast-to-coast AM UFO researcher Timothy Good, who has a track record of this type of activity. Back in 1986, Rich did apparently make a written statement on his behalf in both man-made and extraterrestrial UFOs, but that's about all he did. We can't really deduce much from this. Ask a Robert Bigelow or a Prince Hans Adam II von Lichtenstein or a Lawrence Rockefeller or a Senator Claiborne Pell or a Mac McDonald of McDonnell Douglas the same question, and you get roughly the same answer. But this doesn't mean these men haven't been spreading boatloads of UFO disinformation. The devil is always in the details. Speaking of which, corruption at Lockheed has taken a whole new dimension in recent years, because today the company is actively promoting UFO disinformation by working with Tom DeLonge. The DeLonge case is extremely bizarre. Here we have a successful but totally uneducated singer who, as a UFO buff, decided to work with Dr. Stephen Greer in his super scammy disclosure project. Gradually, Tom DeLonge has begun to take over from Greer as a leading UFO guru with a similar network of deep state contracts. Among his closest associates is Rob Weiss, the recently retired executive vice president and general manager of Lockheed Skunk Works. Together with Weiss in early 2016, he briefed Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta on all things alien, something that came out during the Podesta email leaks of WikiLeaks. Podesta, a first-rate Soros agent, was one of the premier pushers of the disinformation Rockefeller UFO Initiative as Bill Clinton's chief of staff back in the 1990s. One wonders how individuals with backgrounds like this could ever run for the presidency of the United States. Obviously, DeLonge has been repeatedly invited to Coast to Coast AM, but the disinformation he puts out is also reaching the mainstream media, and Lockheed is helping him do it. In fact, not just Rob Weiss is helping DeLonge. On the board of DeLonge's To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, founded in October 2017, we can also find Steve Justice, a former program manager at Lockheed Skunk Works, Other members of this board include ranking CIA anti-terrorism and biological warfare veterans, a member of the elite and CIA-linked Mellon family, and fellow Coast to Coast AM veterans as Hall Pothoff, the Scientologist who set up the CIA's remote viewing program, and Colm Kelleher, another one of the Bob Bigelow's affiliated scientists. I will end it here. Thank you.